Welcome to the Saugus Historical Society's April meeting. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our one item of business today, before we start our program, is our election of officers. And the officers and board members up for renewal this spring are President Laura Eisner, Treasurer Jane Parrott, Directors Jack Klecker and Alan Humphreys. Everyone else is in the middle of their term. So these are all incumbents. We've had nobody say they want to challenge or are eager to join the board. So all in favor of these officers?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any opposed? Very quiet. No. Okay. Very good. So Paul, Joni, Bill, and Dolores are not up for election till next year, and so they are all set. We have, I know we had advertised that it was all going to be about World War II, and a lot of it is tonight, but in the middle of the winter, when I realized that this is a big round number, the 250th anniversary of the official start of the Revolutionary War, I thought we had better have a little bit going on about that as well. I will first pass out to everybody a list of books that we came up with about World War II. Now they are categorized as nonfiction and then some fiction at the end, but even the fiction ones are based on real people, just that they might have been put together and you know, some additional things put in. A few of these are two-sided and some of them are one-sided, but they all include the same information. So you see we'll start out sort of chronologically with the revolution. And since this is such a big year, there's a lot going on in Lexington and Concord. You see new banners up everywhere showing what is happening, like this one, which is highlighting a building that was there during the revolution and in fact was one of the most significant buildings of the evening before, because this is where William Dawes and Paul Revere were headed to warn several people that the British were coming, and or the regulars are out, however they exactly said it, and they knew that their friends were all at this house. So somewhere close to midnight on April 18th, they arrived at what's often called the Hancock-Clark house. Joshua Clark, who owned the house, was a cousin of John Hancock. This is the view of the house as you're approaching it from the center of town, from the Battle Green. So it's a couple of blocks up the street from there. And beautiful old bright yellow house. It's been added to a little bit over the years. Uh-oh. It won't advance. Swipe.
On the screen.
On the screen?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. This is another view showing the back of the house. And I couldn't resist a close-up of the door, because if you look at the bottom, you'll see what a big difference there is between the horizontal of the floorboards and the doorway with that little wedge underneath, something that you often see in old houses as they've settled a little bit. Most of us have probably been to Lexington and Concord a few times in our lives, but maybe not very recently. And one thing you'll notice as you're driving into town is the giant lantern, much bigger than our little lantern here, that no one could hang in the towers of Old North Church without the steeple toppling over. But this big lantern is sitting next to the Concord Museum. It's a new illuminated sculptural piece inspired by, of course, the lanterns that were hung in Boston's Old North Church, though it wasn't called old in those days. There's only one lantern, original lantern, left in existence from the event, and it's inside the Concord Museum. So you can see the original, and this is a larger than life, larger than me representation of the lanterns that were hung there. The sign outside tells a little bit about the background, and it's called the Concord 250 lantern because it's the 250th anniversary. And it says on it, "Lighting the way toward liberty and justice for all." It was sponsored by local businesses and individuals and nonprofits all over the town of Concord, and it's kind of the symbol of their decorative and educational activities, and sponsored largely, organized by the community art organization Art for All. You can see that at night it would be especially noticeable because it's a light glowing, and also on the cloudy day we happened to be there, it was quite bright. It's an electric candle in there, not the real candle of the originals, but certainly a very impressive sight and a new and intriguing thing. There's also on the ground a granite medallion carved with the words Concord Museum, Concord, Massachusetts, and it shows an artistic version of the lantern set in the garden outside the museum. As you head on to the Old North Bridge, which is the scene of all the activity all those years ago, there's a greeting inscribed on the pathway towards the bridge with Ralph Waldo Emerson's words on it that he wrote 100 years after the battle. "The thunderbolt falls on an inch of ground, but the light of it fills the horizon," which was his way of saying that it may have been a seemingly small incident, but absolutely all around the world, people noticed its significance. And he wrote this to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the start of the revolution, but the words still fall true all these 250 years later, or 150 years past the centennial. There are decorative signs and informative signs showing the bridge with sketches that were drawn for the newspapers to inform people of what was going on, and rather grimly, the coffins with the names of the colonists who were killed on that day, both in Concord and Lexington, and a few in Arlington as well, a little bit later. The headlines decry the bloody butchery of the British troops. The same wayside sign provides a period map of significant sites in Concord during those days, and the green area is what's now National Park, including the fields around the Old North Bridge and some other properties that were built upon but that are now part of the museum. A close-up on the sign of the fight shows the smoke clearing and exactly how rustic or rude the bridge was, as people called it. Really just unfinished wood, doesn't look like it would stand up to a flood if the river got some heavy rain, but it stood up to an awful lot going on. Another map on a nearby sign shows the routes that the British soldiers traveled and the routes that Minutemen traveled, following them, chasing them back to Boston. The big yellow kind of bursts of light indicate conflict locations. Oops. All right. A few steps further on, we see the obelisk. That's the monument for the Old North Bridge with a somewhat weathered marble plaque on it telling the significance. And just around the corner, we can see the very gentle bow of the bridge itself. No British on it that morning, but there were a couple of pigeons. I was pretty sure that I heard somebody say, "The pigeons are coming, the pigeons are coming." And in fact, the pigeons stayed a while. I think they were looking for a handout the day that we visited. This is not a British officer here. You might recognize the vice president of the Historical Society. Once you cross the bridge, you'll see another statue, and this one depicts the farmers hastily abandoning their fields and the plowing or whatever work they were doing at home to join the battle and to rush to Lexington. So soldiers came from Saugus and Lynn, which were at that time all part of one town, called Lynn at that point, but included people from the territory we now call Saugus, as well as Linfield. And here's the bridge from another vantage point. Because the field is mostly open and just long grass at this time of the year, you can see the bridge from a lot of different angles, and it's very dramatic. I have to add that this is not the original bridge. It's been rebuilt about 6 times. And the styles changed a little bit. This view of it, if you can see it very clearly, has a little covered centerpiece, and it looks somewhat Victorian with decorative curves in the arches, and I think that they have since decided from reading first-person accounts that it wasn't quite as fancy as that. So 6 bridges, yeah, since 1775. About 400 colonial soldiers from all the surrounding towns who had been able to get there in time watched and waited for the British to arrive. Many of them had been warned by William Dawes, who did make it to Lexington. Paul Revere, unfortunately, had been captured before he could warn everybody and make it to their destination. Here's what the bridge looks like today, with a few of the tourists braving the cold and going out to see it several weeks before the big events. Saturday, April 19th, there will be one of the biggest demonstrations they've had in recent years. They do it annually. There's always a demonstration of reenactors out there portraying both the British and the colonial troops. And even more often than that, there are tour guides on all the sites telling a little bit about what happened on that day. I expect it's going to be one of the most crowded events they've ever had because of the big anniversary. In downtown Lexington, here we see the Minuteman statue there. And it's right at the end of the common. That stood there for, I'm not sure how many decades, but has been there for a long time. And behind it is the historic green. But something you didn't see a year or so ago were the fiberglass horses that depict the riders who were trying to warn everybody in bright eye-catching colors, so you can't miss the fact that there's something new out there. This is at the gift shop and museum, just opposite the green right now. And there's a few in other parts of town as well, because some other museums have big displays that are intentional about them. I also want people to know that people remember that although this is the most famous event and it's the one that is generally designated as the start to the revolution, all the towns around participated in some way. If Saugus hadn't had an ironworks, then we couldn't have been as independent in terms of manufacturing as we were. Up to around that point, most iron materials had to be brought from Europe, a long boat ride. From Saugus and also other towns like Braintree, skilled ironworkers fanned out after the ironworks closed to other parts of New England, including Berwick, Maine, to set up factories of their own. Saugus was the first integrated one that had production from iron ore to materials that were to equipment and nails and all the metal materials that people needed. And the construction continues to go on, because one thing this year that's going to happen is that they will hopefully have 6 water wheels in operation this summer. I'm not sure. It's more than 10 years ago the last time they had that many. But the park ranger says that the ones that are being put up now, if you've been to the ironworks lately, you might have seen the activity going on in the buildings. Just before, in 1775, in February, another event in Essex County occurred, which is known as Leslie's Retreat. Colonel Alexander Leslie, who was a British officer, was told he had to go and search for cannons in Salem. Salem had a few cannons that they didn't want him to find, and he met up with, at another North Bridge, Salem's North Bridge, a group of armed colonial people who were determined not to let him cross the bridge. But he was good at diplomacy, and he said, well, I'm not going to search very thoroughly. I'll just kind of come across the bridge, peek around a couple of buildings, and go back. How about that? And so there was an agreement. He did come, didn't find anything, didn't try very hard, and there were a couple of cannons that were later brought to Lexington that he did not see. So this is another event that was in Salem, a reenactment of a ball that happened. They also reenacted the event itself, had several lectures that they don't have annually, and this is at Hamilton Hall, if people know Salem, and there's a few of the celebrating colonial people. Those people look a lot like some modern Saugonians. You might recognize them. And they attended the ball back in February. We also have in the Center Cemetery, and a lot of people who grew up in Saugus don't even know about this. This was put up in 1976, and it lists all the people that fought in the Revolutionary War from Saugus. I think I counted 60 at one time, but I think there's actually more than that. There were a number of people who went to Lexington. These are people who, some of them made it to Lexington, some of them made it to other later battles, but who fought in the war at some point. Now, we are all of a sudden going to jump 170 years to go on to what was originally advertised as the discussion for this year. Between 1775 and the next events I will talk about, a few things happened, obviously, between the beginning of the Revolutionary War and the almost end of the Second World War. But all of these things had great effects that are still felt in the world today and are very relevant to a lot of the things that we're discussing. Here in the almost center of town, corner of Winter Street and Central Street, is the beautiful space centered around the expanded World War II monument. At the time it was installed, this was the front lawn of the high school. There might be a few people who remember that. What I tend to call the old high school, because now what we think of as the old high school was for so many years the new high school. And part of the building in the background, you can't really see it in this picture, still stands, but another portion of it was burned down in the 1960s. So the beautiful kind of gateway is there, and here we're a little bit closer, showing the brick building with the flags right behind it is the original monument. It got a couple of wings, and it got several little stones depicting different wars in the foreground. I think you can see the dark black and gray stones in front were added later. It's constantly being added to, because every year around Veterans Day and Memorial Day, bricks are added that people sponsor, dedicated to veterans from all different wars. This is one from the Girl Scout troop. thanking all the veterans for protecting our country. And these are bricks on the pathway leading through that arch that we saw. The original monument was erected in 1946, so really barely a year after the war ended. And on it are written all the names. I tried to count them 3 times and I'd lose track. There's so many of them. A few people, I picked this one for a couple of reasons to show you. Vernon Evans was superintendent of schools for a long time and a selectman. And although it's his name, it's not him. He served in World War I, but his son, the only child that he had, Vernon Wynne Evans Jr., served in World War II and survived. So he's at the top of this. They're written alphabetically. 3 names down, you see Arlene Fairchild. I don't really know very much about her. She graduated from Saugus High in 1942, but I point her out because she was one of the several women who are on this monument, and a bit unusual compared to previous war monuments, because women were often on the in the combat zones performing many different roles. Couple of years ago, at the beginning of our biannual discussions of World War II, we had the family of Arthur DeFranzo come, and we had a program on him, so I am pointing out one of the bricks in his name. And here's the World War II little individual monument on at the Veterans Park, showing the countries that were involved. Thelma Holbrook, who is with her husband, Stones here in Riverside Cemetery. Thelma was a longtime member of the Saugus Historical Society, so that's part of why I put that with the beautiful bouquet that somebody in her family left this year. And here's the World War II section of the cemetery at Riverside.
She was a soldier too.
Oh, okay. She never told me that.
Yep. Yeah, I go to the East Saugus Church. That's who she was when it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Oh, very, very interesting. We'll have to talk more about that later, I think. And of course, there's many World War II soldiers who are, doesn't want to go, buried with family members elsewhere. But 2 that are in the World War II plot who were moved from Italy, where they were originally buried, are the Kasabuski brothers. And Walter and John, 2 brothers from a family of 8 brothers, 8 boys. And 4 of them went off to World War II. 2 of them were killed 80 years ago, so this month basically, and 2 others came home, and the other 4 I think were too young or too, I'm not sure what age they were exactly, but they were not part of World War II at all. Many soldiers fought either in Europe or in Japan, but there are a few people who fought both at different times in the war. So Walter and John Kasabuski fought in 1942. They were training in Colorado. They already knew how to ski and were expert skiers. With their nephew Richard showed me some pictures of their amazing ski jumps and things like that. From 1943 to early 1945, they served against the Japanese in the Battle of Kiska Island. And Bill knows quite a bit about that particular incident in the Aleutian chain of islands off of Alaska. Their graves lay side by side. They chose to fight in the same regiment, partly because they had the skills that they knew were needed. They were expert skiers, as I said, so a lot of their activity was in very cold or very mountainous areas. While they were in Saugus, they lived up on Collins Avenue, which was behind the miniature golf course and where Essex Landing is now. They were good at golf too. I'm not sure that there were any particular wartime skills they learned from that, but they were both president of the ski club at different times in the high school, and they arranged to both be assigned to Company E of the 87th Regiment of the 10th Mountain Division, which sometimes they were called the ski soldiers because they were expert at particularly difficult terrain. It was an elite mountain fighting group that specialized in winter operations, so Alaska was a natural place for them. In the spring 1945, they were sent to the Italian Alps to help drive the Germans out of northern Italy. So first they'd been fighting the Japanese in Alaska and then the Germans over here. On April 15th, the younger brother, John, was fatally wounded by a grenade. He lived long enough for his older brother, Walter, to reach him before he passed away. And that happened on April 15th, 1945. Walter's birthday was the next day, April 16th. And 12 days later, so 11 days after his birthday, Walter was shot and killed immediately by a sniper. That was April 27th. So here's the younger brother and then the older brother right after each other.
Excuse me, teacher. They don't allow that anymore.
No, right, because the Sullivan brothers, all in the same group with each other, they were all killed in one battle. So they said, we can't do this to the parents. Now, many of us remember the name Kasabuski because their memorial, their chief memorial, although there's the monuments in various places around town, is a skating rink. So it's the skating rink right outside Breakout Reservation. It's called the Kasabuski Rink. I see the sign has faded a little bit, but there's other material inside. If you don't skate, you might never have seen the chest with their medals and the bronze plaque that's inside there. The rink was dedicated June 6th, 1965, so just a tiny bit over 20 years after the World War II ended. And it seems very fitting, since they liked cold weather activities so much, that it be a skating rink, that a winter sport. That
I had 3 sons that played there.
Yeah.
For Saugus High School.
Yeah, I skated there. I wasn't a good enough skater to be in a hockey team or a famous figure skater or anything like that, but I remember going over there quite a bit when I was young, and I think a lot of Saugonians do remember that. A bronze plaque was inside the rink, and it was hard to get the angle really so that you could read it, but that was there since the 1960s. And put back in fairly recently. The rink was extensively renovated inside. Between 2021 and 2022, it was closed for about half of the year and reopened January 7th, 2022 with new refrigeration for the ice, accessible dressing rooms and heated locker rooms. They'd been pretty cold before. New transformers and safety netting and all kinds of modern accoutrements that make it a more elegant skating rink now. Also inside the rink, and you can go in anytime the rink is open, you can see this case which shows their photographs, a little story about their background in Saugus, all the medals that they won, and the flags that were sent home with them. Now this is John, the younger brother. Here is Walter, the older brother. Their name is on everything inside the rink. This is the, it's sometimes called the Kasabuski Memorial Arena, but I think most of us just still call it Kasabuski Rink, even though it's become more elegant. And here's some of the young people of Saugus having fun today. It's also a tournament site for a lot of hockey players from towns surrounding us. So it's not just local people, even though there are skating rinks in many other towns.
and the high school uses it.
And the high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember hearing that that was the case. Before I turn it over for Bill, I wanted to also mention that there's so much more aspects to World War II. The more we look at it, the more we think about them. And in my close family and friend community, I don't have pictures with me, but I have a photo album that people are welcome to look at later. My closest friend since 7th grade was named Katie Gaines, and her father served in the Army in World War II. He was injured. Someone threw an incendiary grenade at him, and he grabbed it and threw it back, but it exploded in his hand. And his mother thought his face might be gone, but he just got a little indentation in his nose. So he had pictures taken to send back to his mother to show him that he, in fact, still had his face. He served at the Battle of Kasserine Pass in North Africa. He got malaria in Sicily. He landed in Normandy, not on the first few days, but a few days after the main events. He captured some German soldiers, holed up in a bell tower by threatening him with one of those grenades that he had with him in the tank. But the part of his experience that I remember hearing about the most was when he was a prisoner of war in Munich. He was required to work in a job in a German factory and walk to his job. He went by several citizens' homes, and at one lived a beautiful young German woman named Katharina Hammer, whose family didn't like the Nazis very much, and she was very happy to meet a particular American soldier. So after the war, she married him, and they moved back here to Massachusetts, initially to Somerville, where they lived with his mother, Manly Gaines, he was known as Jimmy, with his mother, and then they'd had a few children, moved to Saugus, had a couple more, and lived in Saugus for the rest of their lives. So we may talk about that a little bit more another time, but I want to make sure there's a chance for Bill to talk about his part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before I get to the battle, I wanted to go over some of the things that I had to live through. I was 7 years old when the war started, so that I saw it. I saw the results, but I couldn't really understand them. Yeah, life during World War II was significantly altered by the war effort, characterized by rationing of food groups. Everything we bought had to have a list of how many of these you could have. You couldn't just go in like we do today and buy this, buy this, buy this. And we used to go to a store down on Central Street. I lived up on the top of the hill. And my mother would call up and tell them what she wanted, and then I'd go down and get it. Well, he kept all those things under the counter. So the people from outside of the area, if they came in, all they could see is shelves that were almost bare. But for the families that lived there in the area and went there all the time, he had all the food that you wanted. If it was available. Sometimes it wasn't. Yeah, the mass mobilization of citizens into the military or war industries, people that had jobs otherwise were often brought into GE, and they taught them how to do all the different things necessary, like build cannons that they did down there.
Bill, do you want to run this or tell me when
I don't have any pictures.
Oh,
For this
that's yours, isn't it?
Huh?
Isn't that your picture?
Yes.
Okay.
That's for my next one.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yep. All
I
right.
got
So, go
about
ahead.
9 of them for the
All right.
women's service. There were big propaganda campaigns. Some of the people in Pennsylvania, in the western part of Pennsylvania, you had a lot of German people, And they didn't like the idea of going to war with Germany, by and large, and they often tried to keep from being erected into the service because they didn't feel that it was their part to go and fight Germany. So we had rationings. Rationings had food. You could only buy so much, and you could buy very little meat. Meat was sent to the troops to keep them in good shape. But fuel, you could buy very little fuel for cars. Clothing, you wore the same clothing day after day after day because there wasn't much. They were building uniforms. Citizens actively contributed to the war effort through volunteering for auxiliary services like air raid wardens, Red Cross workers, and civilian defense organizations. My grandfather, Bill Humphreys, lived at the corner of Kenwood and Winter Street. And he became a air raid warden. And I used to go with him. We'd go up on the hill and go around and make sure that the people had their didn't have lights showing. They had to put curtains over the windows to ensure that the bomber planes that they expected to come could never come in. But yeah, and he'd go up and knock at the door if your window showed lights. Say, you can't do that. Social change, men serving overseas, women attended the workforce in large numbers. We had victory gardens. People built gardens so they could have food to eat. Displacement of refugee crisis. That didn't help much around here. It did affect Pennsylvania because they took some of the people and put them into jails, or actually evacuation camps they had that they weren't too sure of. But on the West Coast, they had a very big organization of the Japanese that had come to America, and their families assimilated. They became citizens, but it didn't matter. They were Japanese, so they weren't trusted. So that's a brief history of what we went through day after day before the war. The next thing I wanted to go over was the Japanese forces. On June 7th, in 1942, Japanese forces moved onto the Alaskan territory island of Attu. Attu is actually closer to Japan than it is to the U.S. It was a territory at that time, not a state. But the people that lived there in Attu were primarily Aleuts. They, like I say, they were closer to Japan, much closer to Japan than we were. So the Japanese invaded there, and there were only 2 non-Native Americans on the island, Etta Jones and her husband. They were there because they were teachers. And the U.S. government sent them up there to teach the Aleuts English and to gather them into the ways of America. Etta became a POW when the Japanese moved onto the island. She spent 39 months in a prison in Yokohama, over in Japan. Yokohama is the big city for the shipping. When I went over to Japan in, what was it, 47, they put us into Yokohama. That was the cruise ship from, you boarded in San Francisco, and for 2 weeks you went south because it was later in the year to keep it warm, and then you traveled north up to Yokohama, and from there you were assigned places within. I was assigned way up in the north, Hokkaido. Hokkaido was 12 miles from the Russian area that came down where they had troops. So we were kind of worried most of the time because that was in 58. They had that trouble down in Cuba, and they went through all the different things of the different forces. Like, I was in Army Security Agency. I got the top secret thing that they gave us. We had to have this to go into the building. If you didn't have this, you didn't go in. And they had a area about this size where a trooper was sitting there with a gun. So his job supposedly was to shoot anyone that didn't have a pass. They never shot anyone that I know of, but I wouldn't have liked that idea.
No, I mean, how many people probably forgot it? And
They never forgot.
no, I guess. Yeah.
Another thing we used to do, we used to bet on football games. Mm-hmm. Because we had the Army network, mm-hmm. So we could tell. Not the Army. We had the capability of learning, of hearing any place in the world that did any kind of radio work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We were Morse code intercept operated, but we had two radios, and you could put one of them like to Buenos Aires maybe, mm-hmm. if you wanted that kind of music, wherever. And we went. We could listen to the games mm-hmm. in California and find out that USC won by 21 points. Yeah. Well, the Army unit transferred them the next day because we were in Japan. We were a day ahead of. Mm-hmm. We were on the other side of the line, yeah. So they would have had to transmit it mm-hmm. in the middle of the night, like 4 o'clock in the morning, mm-hmm. and they didn't. So the troopers, new troopers now, they would come in and would listen to the radio there as a group and say, I bet USC is going to win by at least 20 points.
Well, I'm glad you decided to talk about Alaska a bit, since the Kasabowski brothers were stationed there, and that's interesting to learn about that side of the war. I want to make sure that we do have time to hear Diana's letter also. So,
good. Okay.
Yeah, you have a little.
I'll get away from what I went through.
Oh.
On September 1st, in 1950, or 50? No, it was early enough. Her husband was killed anyway during the invasion. Oh. The Japanese sent a force up onto the islands of Attu, and there were about 3,500 Japanese soldiers there, and there were about 2,000 U.S. forces in the area. The Japanese won the battle, and the Barren Island was the scene of some of the bloodiest fighting of the Pacific Campaign. American forces landed uncontested as the Japanese forces dug in to higher ground. Under the attack, 549 American troops died and 2,351 Japanese. The situation was of the invaders, 25% of them died. And only 10 U.S. forces died. The battle ended on May 29th by a charge of the Japanese, and only 28 of the Japanese survived the battle in the end. So they did own the land, but it was an awful price to pay.
Thank you, Bill. And Diana has a letter from her uncle, and talk loud.
It's from World War II, and there's a postmark right here that says U.S. Army Postal Service. They had their own postal service. And it's a letter written by my Uncle Bunny. Bunny was a big guy, but I don't know why they called him Bunny. His real name is Bunny. But it's to my other uncle, Armand Butch. Dear Armand, you must think I'm one heck of a guy for not writing, but I assure you that it was all quite unintentional. I hope you can overlook it. For a person is not always at fault. I shall be a little more on that prompt side in the future. You can never know how happy I was for you when I heard you're becoming a father. And that father, that child is my cousin Joyce, who is now 80 years old. I sure wish I could have been there. I was never more joyed when I was told that that I was to become the child's godfather. Let's hope that this war can see me end soon. Then, and to enjoy is what we need it to be. Life should be what we need it to be. I had to have a picture of you, of your family, soon. I hope to have a picture of you and your family soon, Armin. I would really appreciate it. You sure are one lucky guy. Best of luck to you both. You can never know what an awful thing this war really is. No matter which side you're on, it is a lousy proposition. As far as my part, it is concerned, I have done nothing. But there are so many men who have suffered all the untold agonies that are so much a part of this war. I have very little of the results, yet I have seen quite enough. I pray to God that this comes to an end quickly. Conclusion, as I fear for all mankind if it is prolonged. When you visit the folks, that's my normal and the grandfather and grandmother, his father and mother. When you visit the folks or any of our sisters, and there was a huge family, 13 brothers and sisters, when you must visit the folks or any of our sisters, tell them nothing of my participations. It would only cause so much unnecessary worry. If I could, and this is all tissue paper, they must have been, it's so thin, I can't believe it lasted all these years. But a little more descriptively. I could fill quite a few pages, but you know the limit, the limitation that are a part of the Army censorship. The papers can tell you more than I can tell you. I've ever hope to write. All we can do is hope for a quick ending. I don't, it won't last much longer, I hope. Give Mary, that's my Aunt Mary, give Mary my love and tell her thanks. Keep in touch with me, and if I do fail to answer your letters, until we can begin living once again. And it says, always Bunny. I know now, titled Strange, wasn't it? Or something like that. But,
Okay. Well, thank you, Diana. Thank you, Bill. And it's really wonderful to hear some of these voices from the past. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
wrote so eloquently. I never went to college. I went to the 5th grade.
Right.
My father went to the 8th grade.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
he was very
Yeah.
smart,
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we'll adjourn to the other room. I have a few pictures of Manley Gaines and of the Kasabuski brothers out there that we have to be really careful with, but their relatives loaned it so that people could see a bit of what their lives were like. And refreshments are out there too. So. Thanks.